So welcome to Walpole United WFC.
Good evening and welcome to Burn and Matt Saturday Night Live. And it's the first show that I've been on for absolutely God knows how long. It's been a while. Thank you for Matt for covering me over the Christmas period, as work's been absolutely mega busy. And unfortunately, I've not been able to join yourselves live. But we're back. We're back. Matt, how are we tonight, pal?
Yeah, not too bad, pal. It's been a while, like you say. It does feel like absolutely ages. But yeah, all good, pal. Just pleased to be back on with you. It's always a good show on a Saturday. So yeah, happy days.
Absolutely, pal. Absolutely. And joining us tonight, we do have a special guest, Rich Sprite from Roker Report and from the FAW. Well, I'm messing. This is how long I've not been doing this. From the FA Women's Championship Fan Collective. How are you, pal?
I'm all right. Yeah. Happy enough to see the mighty Cambridge United doing over our local Saudi-owned rivals earlier.
Absolutely.
And, yeah, it put a smile on our face after obviously the men's side losing a last-minute goal against Wickham live on the telly this afternoon, which I'm sure the neutrals really enjoyed, but we didn't. It was a good game, but yeah. But if we never have to play Wickham Wanderers again, I'll be a very happy man. But we're not here to talk about the men, are we?
No, exactly, mate. Exactly. Anyway, I just wanted to start off by saying, once again, I do apologise that I have been away, but I am back now. So hopefully the fun will commence again. This is a little bit of a different show today. Obviously, with the game getting postponed, cancelled, whatever you want to call it, because of COVID issues at West Ham. This was supposed to be obviously the West Ham preview, but unfortunately that's got knocked on the head. But I think you'd agree with me. This is going to be an absolute top show with what Rich is going to sort of open your minds up to and sort of discuss along with Matt, who I know is very knowledgeable in these sort of situations and everything, and teach me a thing or two, being as though I'm mainly a men's football supporter. I'm still learning about things. I'm still willing to learn. I still want to know what's going on. And it's just going to be a very good, informative show. It's going to be a good learning process, I hope, for a lot of people out there, especially for the people that may not know the difficulties that a lot of women's sides face, not only in the Women's Championship, let's be fair, but from all the way through the tiers, even from the WSL, all the way down to the bottom end of the pyramid. Matt, I'll start off with you first, pal, as we traditionally always do. What kind of do you know about this sort of thing, first and foremost? What sort of knowledge have you got over it before we hand over to the expert?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is sort of followed on, if you like, from obviously a couple of shows we've ran this week and sort of tweets we've put out about Coventry United and women's football in general, really. Obviously, I reached out to Rich and sort of, wanted to find out more basically about what's going on with the fan group. I've heard good thing. Obviously, Natalie's a part of it as well, and she's sort of been filling me in while she's been away. And it was something that we feel ourselves, not only Coventry United, but women's football in general. There's a lot to be, improved, shall we say? And there's a lot where fans can, I think, in my view, play sort of a big part. Things like equal prize money for FA Cups. And obviously we had Lucy Ashworth-Clifford on from Lewis, and she was sort of saying all the work they do. And it's kind of similar in a way, similar values in LinkedIn. So for me, it was important. And it's important to sort of, like I say, get this show and get this message out there. Things like that. I called it a plan B because I thought, if you look at sort of financial issues in the women's game, not just Coventry, there's been other clubs as well had difficulties over the past 5 to 7 years. What needs to be done? What is the plan B? What's the going forward process? How can we help as fans? So it was really important, like I say, to get this message out, and it will follow on obviously from a good week. We spoke to Paul on Wednesday from Radio Coventry, and we also had Tom, Gary and Rich Laverty on as well, and they were sort of giving us an insight and how they feel sort of football can grow going forward. And obviously fans have got a big part for that. So yeah, looking forward to this tonight. That's my sort of little intro. But I will obviously, get Rich to come in now and sort of introduce what the Fan Collective is all about, really.
Oh, cheers, Matt. So I've been following women's football on and off for quite a long time. Used to sit and read the notes on the women's team in the program at the Stadium of Light in the early 2000s with interest, and back then it seemed quite exciting and new and different. And obviously over the past 20 years, Sunderland have been up and down. The highs have been pretty high and the lows have been really low. But we've had that kind of long history. Actually, well, some could say it goes back to the middle of the First World War, but certainly from the late 1980s onwards, there's been a Sunderland Ladies Football Club or Sunderland Women's Football Club in various guises. And so, it's only over the last it's only basically since we got relegated or got demoted, when the FA, some might say, wanted to make room for the likes of Manchester United to come into the league, and made the license conditions such that a club that was maybe struggling financially, like Sunderland were at the time, just being relegated from the Premier League on the men's side, having a billionaire owner who basically lost interest, and saw the women's side as pretty much expendable. Then we fell down the leagues. We were in the National League, and rebuilding. And it was kind of that story that re-engaged my interest in it, that, of all of the sections of the club that were suffering, it seemed that the women were suffering the most and not getting any attention. So when I got involved writing and editing with Roker Report and podcasting, I made it kind of like part of my mission to make sure they got coverage. And part of that this season has been getting in touch with and connecting with the fans from other clubs, the other 11 clubs in the Championship. We do a pre-match feature on the website called Fan Focus, and so I've been reaching out and kind of making connections with fans across the Women's Championship all year. Been meaning to get everyone together into like a WhatsApp group at some point, just to kind of keep in touch and create those connections, because the more coverage and the more fans are writing about the Women's Championship, the more hits it gets on websites, the more people know about it, the more attendances you get. But never got around to it. We had so much going on. Roke Report had a huge fundraiser over Christmas that we've been planning for months for. And then that fundraiser kind of was just coming to an end. We'd done really well. And then Coventry United went bust. Or they had the plug pulled from them, the funding plug pulled from them. And Paul, from who you spoke to, I'd been in touch with since he did the commentary on our first game in the Championship, and it was great. We weren't expecting it. We were like, oh, we're not going to be able to follow this game, and actually we could stick it in our ears. And we had a really brilliant commentary from Paul, and he was raving about how good Sunderland were, and so we stayed in touch ever since. And so when that story came out, I got in touch with Paul and went, what is this? Where's this come from? And he hadn't even heard anything about it. I brought the news to him, which was completely the wrong way around. It just shows how out of the blue it came. He had absolutely no idea that this was coming. And so I got in touch with him and went, look, let's pull all the fans together. Let's do something about this, because it's wrong. And if it can happen to one club, it can happen to any of us. And Sunderland have had the rug pulled out of them so many times. Twice we've been relegated out of the WSL, 2012 and 2017, without having actually been relegated ever from the WSL. We've been demoted twice for non-footballing reasons. And if this can keep happening to a big institution like Sunderland Football Club, big historic football club, with all the silverware we've got in our past, what about a little club like Coventry United? We need to kind of show a bit of solidarity and a bit of kind of togetherness, and so we basically started the group. Natalie was recommended. we've got John who's listening in, big Sunderland fan, Ian Todd, who's a long-term Sunderland ladies fan, is on the Red and White Army Supporters Trust as a rep for the women's game. I'm the rep for Roke Report, so we know each other through that. And we pulled everyone together. Watford fans, we've got Watford, Crystal Palace. I've just been talking to them lot on another podcast just before I joined yous. So, some really great people from across the league, and we thought, well, let's use our combined strength and the audience and kind of the power of fans, which has been more evident in the last year than ever, including yourselves at Man United. To do something good and to just keep this, because the issue that we knew was going to be the case is it was Christmas. It was 2 days before Christmas. Coventry are tiny. They've got a small fan base. It would have easily disappeared off the agenda if we didn't just keep banging and pushing and, tweeting at people. I've done a lot of social media campaigning. I also work for a trade union as well. So, I know how to campaign, and so we just did it, and it's had a reasonably big impact. I don't know what our impact actually has been, but we certainly kept the story going, and we've kept plugging on it, and we've kept in touch, and we've kept the kind of the connections going, and hopefully it's had some impact on the fact that Coventry's been saved. What we've now got to do is make sure that we protect the rest of our league and the rest of the pyramid.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, mate, you said that you've been doing a lot of Twitter campaigning and you've reached out to a lot of people. Have you actually heard anything back from the governing body? Have you heard anything from the FA at all? Have they sort of reached out to you and maybe said, we've seen what you've been doing over social media. We will look into it. Have they had any sort of opening dialogue from the FA at all?
No, not directly from the FA. Obviously, the FA have been silent on the whole matter, apart from the announcement the other day that they're going to deduct 10 points from Coventry and basically relegate them with that. That's all they've said on the matter. Literally haven't said a single other word about it. Well, they did have a little. I think they gave a line to the Guardian on the day that the news broke that they were basically going to engage with the club and the players. They have not contacted us directly. We have, obviously, through some of us being part of supporters trusts and stuff, we've got links with the Football Supporters Association, and we've got a meeting set up with them on Monday where a few of us are going to go on a Zoom call with their head of women's football and discuss how this is going to be put in front of the decision makers, but also part of our collective. We're really fortunate. We've got some really good political connections inside there. So we've actually got people who work for members of parliament who are part of our collective, really well, strategically well placed members of parliament. Because what really needs to happen is the fan-led review that came out earlier in the year that had a recommendation that there should be a separate review for women's football. That needs to happen immediately, and it needs to happen before the legislation goes through Parliament that sets up the independent regulator. Otherwise, it's just going to be something that gets kicked down the road. Yeah, that is bolted on afterwards as an afterthought. It needs to be integral, and they need to be regulated by the same regulator, but with a different kind of set of regulations as well, because it isn't the same. Women's football isn't the same as the 4-5 professional leagues that the men's game has in England. It's got 1 and a bit professional leagues of 12 clubs. That it's a different game with a weirdly different mix of clubs involved. In our league, we've got Liverpool, we've got Lewis and Coventry. We've got tiny, almost village clubs, and one of the, I know he's at Man United, but one of the biggest clubs in the world. Along with yourselves, and then you've got clubs in between. Sunderland, obviously, huge institution. Watford and Crystal Palace, medium-sized Premier League clubs. Your Blackburns, Blackburn, Bristol City, Charlton Athletic, all kind of like those kind of EFL level clubs. And then your Lewis's and your Coventry's and your London City Lionesses, who we don't have a rep from London City Lionesses. We're not actually sure they have any fans, really. Not entirely convinced that they have it. They certainly don't have any vocal fans on Twitter. But if they do, if I'm wrong, then if they can get in touch with us, we'd love to have someone from London City Lionesses involved. We just can't find anyone, which is a bit strange.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting you talk about that because obviously I think for me, the more fans that come together, like you say, they're trying to find them to give that voice. I think it's sort of like a strength in numbers thing, isn't it? And I absolutely agree. And this is why we're sort of having this conversation. It does need its own independent regulation because it's all well and good people saying, oh, well, we've got this for the men's game. But like you mentioned before, it's a completely separate sort of entity. It's unique in the fact that, finances, for example, most of the players play. I mean, even in the championship, some of them aren't getting wages to just get expenses, So unless you're a professional club, it is a massive struggle. And I think this is why now sort of what you've put together as a group is really interesting. It can only be, good for the whole of the game, like you say, sort of championship and even down, even third tier, fourth tier, we still, in my view, got, a duty where as fans, if we can look after those clubs as well, then we need to do so. I want to sort of obviously touch then on some of the aims because reading through some of the aims of the club, obviously starting a sort of fan-led review was one of them. But sort of talk to me a little bit about the golden share bit then, because I'm assuming that's through like ownership. So whether fans are sort of buying in, is that something where you'd be looking to maybe get a percentage within sort of clubs, or is that like a complete full takeover from fans?
No, it's something that it's a concept that is integral to the recommendations for the men's game from the Crouch review, which is that supporters groups in all clubs in the men's professional pyramid should have what they call a golden share. It's a bit like, I mean, at Chelsea, for example, the pitch at Stamford Bridge and the badge are owned by a separate company to what Roman Abramovich owns.
Right.
And they can't be changed without this other organization's say so. It's basically the fans have got a control over those elements of the heritage of the club. Yeah. So it isn't fan ownership. It's essentially a share that says if the fundamentals of a club are going to change, its ground, its shirt, its badge, what leagues it plays in. For example, for Man United, you've had the whole Super League fiasco go on. That wouldn't be allowed to happen without the fans groups, fans representatives having the final say on that kind of proposal. It isn't to say that they have any ownership in terms of having to invest money or buy a share. I mean, I'm all for kind of the 50+1 kind of thing you've got in Germany, but that isn't what's on the table. That golden share is a guarantee of kind of the existence of the club in one form or another, that some shyster can't come along and pull the plug like they did with Coventry United without anyone knowing anything about it. So it's just that oversight. And a club like Lewis, I mean, there's a lot of talk at the minute like that the situation at Coventry might undermine confidence in a club like Lewis, but the difference with Lewis is that the fans own that club. They are actively involved in it. Nobody could do anything like what's happened to Coventry United at Lewis. And they've also got really active and really professional fans involved. So like their fundraising, their marketing is absolutely spot on. It's as good as any Premier League club in many respects, much better than what Sunderland fans get in terms of fan experience at the ground for women's football. So like, I'm not really worried about Lewis. I'm more worried about your kind of London City Lionesses or even Durham, where Durham have done fantastic, but their ownership I think is really vulnerable. Personally, I think they're quite vulnerable to somebody like Newcastle coming in and saying, "We'll buy you. We'll jump up the league. We want to be in the WSL. We'll jump up the league. We'll buy Durham. We'll rename it and we'll call it Newcastle Durham or whatever, and we'll go into the WSL that way." And again, I think this is something we have to be really conscious of, is that there are Premier League teams, Leeds, Newcastle, big championship clubs as well, who don't have teams in either of the kind of top two women's leagues, and they'll be wanting that in the next few years, and that's something we're going to have to keep our eyes on, is how that happens. Because at the minute you've got Brighouse playing against Leeds United, you've got Newcastle playing against Chesley Street, because that's the tier that they're in. You've got big old Newcastle United and tiny little Chesley Street, and those disparities go right across the pyramid, and that's something we're going to have to keep our eyes on. And I think it needs to be considered in the review. So, like you mentioned, obviously we got our demands, or the kind of almost like manifesto that we put out. Having that golden share is really important, but the rest of it isn't really kind of particularly controversial stuff, other than maybe, and I know one thing that you wanted to talk about was finance.
Yeah,
is the kind of what I call like reparations, because obviously women's football was banned for 50 years and then kind of suppressed for another at least 20, and has only really been given prominence in the last 10 years of any significance. So men's football has been able to develop with no competition and monopolize the entire market for football in England, and monopolize the money. And for me, there's an argument to say some of the wealth that has been built up by clubs like yours, Man United, but even clubs like Sunderland, where we've got big stadium, big fan base, big support, multi-million pound revenue even in League One. There's a responsibility and an almost like an obligation to fund, because too often women's football is seen as charity, or as a luxury, or as the first thing that can get cut, or as a hobby in the case of the Coventry United situation, a nice little hobby, and then when it gets boring they cut and run. There needs to be mandatory financing from my perspective, and there's a lot of talk about sustainability in women's football. I really worry about that sometimes, because for me it always has the kind of the mark of somebody saying that the income that they generate through gate receipts and sponsorship, that's what you've got to spend, because that will be sustainable. But actually that's baking in the inequalities that are already there, that have been built up because it was banned for 50 years. So I don't know how it can be done. I actually spoke to the Crouch Review on this matter when they were taking evidence. We were really open to it. But for me, there's got to be something more creative done, whereby there's a pool of money that clubs can, that maybe there's a grant to every club at a certain level of a certain amount every year.
Yeah,
that's paid for by the Premier League and the EFL TV deals or whatever. That underpins their ability to basically pay 22 professional footballers a decent wage, and from that's when you've got a product. You've got people training professionally every week, every day, looking after themselves, not having to finish work as a teacher or finish work as a nurse and then come and train and then play on a Sunday and possibly, if work calls them in, not be able to turn up. We need a quality product that'll bring fans in or bring sponsors in, but that has to be underpinned by some financing, and that needs to be mandatory. And that will allow a club like Durham, a club like London City, a club like Coventry, a club like Lewis to compete at a certain level playing field. And then the other clubs, the Sunderlands, your Blackburns and Watfords and Crystal Palaces, to be able to invest from the men's side on top of that, it'll unlock an investment, because it won't then become a luxury. It will become integral to their clubs, but there needs to be a base level of finance that makes it possible for that. The FA have got a vision of having, in 5 years, having 2 fully professional leagues. That is only possible if there's a transfer of money from the men's professional game with all of its billions to the women's professional game, and then it'll unlock an investment in the lower tiers as well. It's a big ask, but this is why we need the review now, and it needs to be done part and parcel at the same time as the legislation goes through Parliament for the independent regulator with the men's game, so that the two are regulated separately, but they're intertwined, because they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, we may as well go straight into finance.
Well, that's the point I was going to come on, because one of the points that has, because it is FA Cup weekend for the men, one of the points that has struck across me there is prize money in the FA competitions as well, because there's a massive disparity between the winners of the FA Cup of the men's game and the winners of the FA Cup of the women's game. It's a massive, massive divide in prize money. And also, I can imagine money that's distributed throughout TV rights in the FA Cup as well. I think, I was just watching the Everton Hull City game there. I think Hull are nearly going to make about £1 million altogether with BBC's TV rights, their ticket money and whatever. So I was just wondering where this money is going to come from the likes of for you Durhams, for your London City Lionesses and all that stuff, that they've not already got a big men's team backing them. And you've got to think, though, in the men's leagues, obviously the Premier League is king. The Premier League's regulated differently to the FA. The FA have got no say in the Premier League. The FA have got no say in the EFL, the English Football League. They're all run separately. Where's this money going to come from? Can this report then go to the Premier League and say, you've got to give an X amount, a reasonable sum, for example, to the women's game? Can the Premier League then go, no, listen, we don't, it's nothing to do with us, that's an FA competition, will this then entwine arguments? Can legalities all come in? Can people start saying, oh, look, Premier League's regulated differently, the EFL is regulated differently? Or do you think that it's about time that football now pulls together as a one unit? Yes, the FA is separate to the Premier League. I know that the EFL, that they're also separate from the Premier League and the FA, but it's still English football. It's still our game. It's still a game of the people. Well, you like to think it's still a game of the people. I'm just worried for the teams like you say, like your Durhams, like your London City Lionesses, like Cov United. Where's all this money going to come from, though? Because at the FA, they're pretty stooge with their money. Let's be fair, they're stooges with their money. They don't like dipping their hands in their pockets if they don't have to. Especially when it comes to the women's game. You look at grassroots football, for example, the FA absolutely ruining grassroots football. They're selling off council pitches left, right and centre for bits and bobs. We've got in Manchester, we've got stuff closing down. The Trafford Park there, the old soccer dome there, that's been closed down. That should have been saved. So kids could have somewhere, there's a predominantly indoor venue, somewhere they could train in the winter. That's all gone. It's like, where's this money going to come from?
Well, there's plenty of money in football.
Yeah, there is, of course, yeah.
And it isn't a zero sum game either. And what I'd like to say, just on one point, there's sometimes clubs further down the pyramid can not be a bit sniffy but get angry when they see stuff like Man United going to build a new ground for the women's team. For me, that's amazing. It's fantastic. Because what it is a club. All right, whatever you think of your owners, taking the women's game a hell of a lot more seriously than they ever have done before. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There's money in football. What you said, where does it come from? Well, for a start, there are already levies on transfers. There's and this really has to be looked at in the context of the Crouch report and what that is proposing. So you've said, the Premier League is separate from the EFL, separate from the FA. The FA runs women's football and grassroots football. The EFL runs its league. The Premier League runs its league. That's the whole point of having the new IREF, the independent regulator for English football, is to sit above that, is to create a framework within which all of English football is regulated. And I think within that framework, women's football has to be part of that. It can't be done separately. You maybe need a separate set of rules, but all governed by the same regulator.
Yeah.
Because then you can create levies that are held centrally and then distributed to grassroots football, to women's football, to lower down the men's football pyramid where teams are really, really struggling as well. And that kind of pooling of resources, almost taxation, essentially, is what it's a taxation model. And in taxation, you pool resources and then you look at where the needs are, where you need to invest collectively in order to improve the lot of everyone. That's the whole purpose of taxation. So, there is plenty of money and the game generates a hell of a lot of money and it's still generating. The Premier League has just got a huge new deal with American broadcasters. It's going to, again, ramp up the incomes of Premier League clubs. There is plenty of money within the game. It's about how it's distributed within the game. And that can only be done through the IREF and through legislation. And this is, you say, where does the money come from? How are the rules governed? It has to be done with law sitting behind IREF, and the IREF having the power to make decisions, all right, with the consultation of the clubs and the leagues and all the other stakeholders, the fan groups. Of course, it's not going to be a dictatorship, hopefully, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens over the next few months as it goes through Parliament in terms of what shape that regulator actually takes, because it will be quite new in terms of global football. But so I think it's look, people are going to say that there's barriers, and it's, I think it was somebody on this podcast straight after the Coventry United is one of the agents of the Coventry United players saying, you can't have Tesco's subsidising your corner shop. That isn't what we're talking about, because we're talking about it isn't Tesco's. It's as we've as yous have said at Man United, your club is a lot more than a business. It's the culture of your city. If you're part of the city or a part of your city in Sunderland, it is the whole thing. It's our city. Is the football club. It's the center of the culture of our areas. So I think there's I don't have the answers. I'm not a football finance expert. I'm kind of political scientist and a trade unionist and a football fan. But I do think about systems and how systems work. And you have to look at this systemically, and it has to be, we have to be bold, and we have to be quite radical about it, because otherwise it'll be incremental change. It'll be a little bit of change, and the power that your clubs, I'll get my Sunderland hat on a little bit. Your club basically took our place in the WSL as a Sunderland fan. Yeah. Right. Essentially, that is what happened. Yous were allowed into the WSL structures and we were taken out. Right. And the FA, a lot of Sunderland fans will say the FA just don't want a North East club in WSL. They want a cluster in Northwest. They want a cluster in the Midlands. They want a cluster in London. They don't give a crap about Northeast. It's a bit like HS2, only goes to Leeds, and then they're not even going to go there now. They'll go to Birmingham, go to Manchester. That's all that people care about. We've suffered in the past. And so I think that's kind of maybe why Sunderland fans are kind of at the forefront of this. Is like, we don't want to see it happen to other clubs. But we also are quite ambitious because we've got the history in women's football to say, not only have we produced half the England squad down the years, but we've been FA Cup final, we've been right at the top of the WSL, and we've been there, almost from the beginning. So, yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot to be done, and on our list of demands is other things like you said, equalising the prize money in the FA Cup. That's something that can just be done now. The FA could choose to do that even this season, certainly next season, and that would go a long way to kind of showing their intent. But it can't be the be all and end all. That's just an action that can be taken straight away. And then the promotion and relegation on football and merit I touched on there in terms of what happened to us and maybe what happened to yous in terms of getting yourselves into the WSL structures in the first place. It was a commercial decision on the part of the WSL to get Man United and Tottenham involved. And that's why I worry that there's going to be a commercial decision that they want Newcastle and Leeds to be involved, not Sunderland and West Ham. Sunderland and Watford. They want Leeds and Newcastle in because they're the big brands when it comes to the Premier League. Although we'll see what happens with Newcastle, whether they're in the Premier League next year. The other thing that I think fans need to be aware of, is actually about the Premier League. I don't know how many women's football fans are aware, but it's a bit of an open secret. The FA does not want to run the WSL anymore.
Yeah, we've had this conversation plenty of times.
It wants to step back, and the Premier League will be taking over the WSL. And at that point, that I think is a real point of risk for the Women's Championship, where your likes of your Leeds and Newcastle will get bumped up at the expense of a Durham, at the expense of even an AFL club like Sunderland or Blackburn or Charlton would miss out, because the Premier League will see the WSL as essentially just its women's version, and they'll want the same clubs in it. And that's why we talk about promotion and relegation on merit. Footballing merit. But again, to be able to do that, you need the finances. Because I think I'm really, really clear that you need professional teams, you need good stadiums. You can't. Sunderland play at Appleton Colliery Welfare. It's a colliery welfare ground. It's a social club essentially with a football pitch. That's got to be improved. We've got to be able to get 6, 8, 10,000 people coming to watch games, and that's exactly what Man United are doing. But for that to happen, you need a pool of money underneath, so that if Durham got promoted, they could dip into, say, a license requirement fund, so that they could fund the improvements in Maiden Castle or move to a different ground, so that it was promotion and relegation on footballing merit, not on who owns you, essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you want to take that question on screen as well, Rich, from Paul? It's probably similar to what you've more or less touched on, but he's talking about, clubs, top 2 tiers, putting 5% of the wage bill into a pot. Do you reckon that's something that could potentially work? I mean, I don't know if he's talking just women's football or men's football putting their wages in, but what do you make of that?
I mean, 5% of Premier League wage.
It's Premier League, we're laughing.
If it's 5% of the Premier League wage bill, that's probably more money than I could even calculate. It'd be a ridiculous amount of money. I mean, just Just 5% of Cristiano Ronaldo's wages would fund the FA Women's Championship for probably a decade.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but that's, you know, maybe we go for 5%, we get 1%. It's still that pot of money that could really be transformative. So yeah, call it a luxury tax, call it a levy, call it what I would call it is reparations, which is just repairing the damage that was done to women's football by a group of men going, oh no, they can't play in our grounds anymore because, you know, they've taken money away from men after the First World War. And that is as blatant sexism as that. You know, it'll ruin their health. It'll be bad for them. They'll be able to have kids. Ridiculous. But that's stuck till 1971, and we should never forget it. You know, men did that. I know, and I recognise. You know, we're three blokes talking about this. Men did this to women's football, and men's football. You know, despite all the crap you see, you know, it's terrible. It needs, if you want parity, if you want payment, it's got to get better in terms of the quality. It's nonsense. Yeah, it's, you know, you're talking about something that's basically had a lead weight on its back for decades, after, you know, 100 years since that. So for me, that would be reparations. That would be repaying some of the damage that men's football did to women's football, repaying some of the money that, if women's football had that 100 years of development, would have come its way already. And that's the point, that men's football was allowed to develop without any competition. In tennis is always brought up. If there was no women's tennis, for example, and I know prize money in that has been an issue. If there was no women's tennis, the men would be probably getting paid even more than the ridiculous amounts they currently get paid.
Yeah.
You know? So yeah. So I mean, that's my kind of soapbox about it, which is that we need to be radical about it. And the point of the collective of the 12 clubs in the championship is it's almost like we're the most vulnerable lot. We're the ones who've got a mix of your Liverpools and then your Sunderlands and Watfords and then your Lewises, where there's such disparities between the resources that sit behind. You know, the resources behind Coventry and Sunderland. The scale of the club is ridiculously different, and then between Sunderland and Liverpool, the scale of the resources is just so different. That's where the vulnerability is, and it's almost like we're the example. And if you get the second tier right, you'll get the whole pyramid right, because it's the link between the elite and the kind of the regional game. So, you know, and that needs this review to go straight away. So that's what's got to be the focus. And from what we know from our contacts, there will be pressure put in Parliament. I think Zara Sultana, the Coventry MP, wrote to Nadine Dorries, the sports minister, this week, saying start the review. That pressure will come from the DCMS committee. It'll come from local MPs. And if there's people watching this and people, you know, watching live or watching on the recording, one thing that you could do is write to your MP. We've all got MPs. Write to your MP and ask them to write to DCMS, asking them to start the review. If DCMS gets 600, 1,200, 2,000 letters in their inbox from MPs saying another constituent's written to me, I used to work for an MP in an MP's office. I used to write these letters myself, right, to departments saying, here's another case, here's another case, here's another case. And eventually they come back and say, oh, right, yes, we'll get it going.
Look into it, yeah.
And so if there's one thing that people can do, and it'll set that chain of events off where all of the other things on our list of demands kind of falls into place, maybe apart from the PFA thing, which is a slightly separate issue. Then it's getting the review started, because without it, none of the other stuff's going to happen. Maybe the equalising prize money, the FA could do that tomorrow, but all the stuff around golden shares and financial regulation and ensuring promotion, relegation on football merit. That's all going to be part of the review.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt. Something that's popped into my head there is that we've seen in the men's game, especially since the Super League fiasco and everything, that Gary Neville's been really, really outspoken about regulating football, about getting an independent regulator in. Do you think it needs somebody just as famous for the women's game, maybe an ex-pro or a current pro, to come out and maybe say this is what we need, this to try and back you guys up as well in a way as well, to try and sort of rally the troops up to maybe, sort of like you said, London City Lionesses, you've not heard a peak from at the minute, but maybe if they see Alex Scott, for argument's sake, they said on television, on BBC or wherever she may pop up on, that she's behind you guys. She's seen on your campaigns on social media. She wants to get involved and try and get people involved within this campaign to try and get people thinking about making a difference, to try and pressure people in Parliament, to try and make sure that the women's game has a big enough say in it. They're not going to get, as you said, pushed aside and kicked down the curb, further down the line. So, do you think it may be, seeing Gary Neville being so outspoken about it from the men's sort of side, do you think it needs maybe whether it be an ex-pro or a current pro from the women's game to come out and maybe speak up?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we've had is a lot of support, obviously, from the Coventry United players, and the manager, and all the staff at the club there. But also, we've had some Man City players tweeting about the situation at Coventry United. Yes, I mean, from our collective's point of view, we are, we started on Christmas Eve. I had the day off work, and we got it all running from then, and then we've had Christmas, and we've had no women's football until this weekend coming up. So we're in really early stages. What we also need as well is the way of involving people outside of our core group as well, because there's like 20 of us who are pretty active and well connected, but we know that there are hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of fans of women's football out there who can play their part, and that's why we're saying contact your MP. That's an action you can take. We don't have a membership structure. We don't have like a committee. We don't have a bank account. We've got a logo, a Twitter account, or a WhatsApp group, essentially, and some really committed people who know what they're doing. And I think this is, what we've made clear right from the beginning is we know what we're doing. Yeah. Like we're people who are involved in supporters trust. We're people who work for members of Parliament. We're people who have got a lot of experience in campaigning. So we're not mucking about on this, but we are in really early stages. So, if it's an Alex Scott, if it's an Enya Luko, if it's a Steph Houghton or a, Beth Mead, or, Ella Toon, whoever it is, Megan Rapinoe, where, we go right to the top, would be ace, but we are like a Twitter account with 400 followers at the minute. But that's why we're going out, we're talking. Paul's been talking to you. Obviously, got Nat involved with yourselves, and she's brilliant as well in her connections and all of, the fact that she can link me and Paul in with other people. And this is what it's about. A couple of weeks ago, we didn't have that capacity. And what we've got to do is keep building that capacity, and certainly, getting top, well-known ex-pros involved would be class. People with a voice on media that, people like us, just ordinary fans really, who are involved in fan activism, but we're just bloggers and podcasters and stuff like that. We're not on primetime BBC, and we can't reach millions. We reach tens of thousands. You can't reach millions. So we've got to do that. And you're right. That's kind of got to be one of our next steps, is to kind of reach out to the wider community, but getting that voice in Parliament, really, because that's the forum for where this battle is going to be fought, is going to be with the women's review and just getting that kicked off is going to be the biggest thing. So our meeting with the Football Sports Association on Monday is going to be absolutely crucial to making sure that gets taken forward. And again, with our contacts inside of politics, making sure that DCMS does what Tracy Crouch said it needs to do. It's really important.
Yeah, just listening there, because I'm just thinking a few things, but I'll sort of throw one thing out there at a time. I think it's interesting because, we're talking about this and the role fans can play. And obviously you mentioned writing to your local MP, but I think as well, obviously we touch on social media. Now, obviously, like you said, social media probably won't reach millions, but I read something the other day from the prospective Coventry owner, and he said, I basically was aware of this situation I put in, or I'm going to put in money because of the backlash from fans. And, it's been, we've seen the fundraising with Michael, and he's obviously been on Sky Sports, and it's got around MPs. And I think for me, social media can play a part. Obviously, you mentioned, you've only just started out. There's only 400 followers. But if you think people, like you say, that have connections that come on board, whether it's our club, whether it's another club, whether it's WSL, whether it's National League, that's how it grows. And I think for me, I've got a tweet here. Mike's just replied to our Twitter. He's putting the championship need a sponsorship or TV package that provides guaranteed yearly income to cover all the costs and expenses so that gate receipts can then help the club slowly grow, which again, things like that. I mean, obviously on here, for example, I know myself, Natalie, Ben, we've all been to other clubs' games when our own club hasn't got a game. I think it's things like that where, people may not realise the impact that going in. If there's a group of 10 people and they're all paying £5 to £10 a ticket, that's extra money. You've got extra money on food. It's building those connections that I think for me will help it grow. So in terms of obviously fan participation, we've seen for Coventry, they've raised 15k in two weeks. Obviously that's the fans, which is fantastic. But for me, this is why I talk about the need for a plan B, because, fans can only dig in their own pockets so far. And, Coventry's just one club. We saw Holwell Sports, Women's Football Club. They've gone, if I go back to Yeovil had to have their funding in advance from the FA. You've got Doncaster Bells, obviously you've mentioned Sunderland. Notts County went bump the day before the spring series. It seems to be happening far too often. So I think social media, like you say, writing to your own MP, get the wheels in motion, like you say, because I think we talked about as well, sort of not wanting a disparity between, like you mentioned, the top half. You look at them top 4 clubs in the championship, or your top three or four professional clubs, or the clubs that are full time. You've then got your chunk in the middle, and like you say, the chunk towards the bottom, which is like your Sunderland, your Watford, your Sheffield, and probably Blackburn, similar budgets. And I think it's, like you say, not creating too big a gap between the top, middle, and bottom of the championship, the National League, and the WSL. I don't know if you want to sort of add to that, Rich.
Yeah, I mean, it's again. I mean, the women's championship is a really interesting division because you've got Durham and Liverpool at the top. Couldn't be more different. Like, just literally couldn't be more different as football institutions. They couldn't be more different. And then you've got a professional club like Coventry United. It's really struggled in terms of full-time professional, but very low paid. But then you've got a club like Sunderland where it's part-time, mainly part-time. Not everyone's got a proper contract, but the infrastructure at Sunderland AFC means that they've got access to world-class training facilities, world-class data analytics, sponsors, and all of the infrastructure that comes with a huge institution like Sunderland AFC. And the commitment of the football side of Sunderland AFC to at least equal access, if not equal funding, but equal access to the backroom stuff. And, they've got as many training pitches as they want. They've got the big sports hall. They've got the Academy of Light. They've got all the facilities, all the gyms and pools and everything that they want. And that pays off probably more than the full-time contract. Yeah, because of the infrastructure and the support that a club like Sunderland, that it can give. So it's interesting that you've got because the middle of the championship, someone wins 2 games, it'll be in 4th. Someone loses 2 games, it'll be in 10th. That's the way it is at the minute. There's not much in terms of football in between them, which makes it really fun in terms of that. But also, then you've got the issue that it's 1 up, 1 down. So
yeah,
we're going to get to a point really soon where, especially if Coventry don't get the points deduction gone, and Liverpool are probably just going to go off, you're going to be have 10 teams sitting there going,
yeah,
what's the point? What is the point in this
no
fixture?
Chance. Yeah,
because the prize money is so small. There's not going to be much difference between finishing second and finishing 11th. It makes no difference to anything. It's not like every place is going to earn you another £500,000.
Yeah.
And so the competitiveness is brilliant at the minute. I hope it's sustained for the season. But I mean, like you say about the kind of the underpinning, like Mike suggested, I've heard him suggest that before. Having that base level of funding, however it comes, I do think the need for reparations is possibly the more fair way of doing it. And then you're not dependent upon us, but finding the next sponsor. But yeah, certainly have that base level of funding that allows other people to invest. And it allows, like I say, allows a Durham to be competing alongside Liverpool. And if they, pip Liverpool to the title, they should be able to go up. The fear I've got, fear lots of people got, if Durham actually did finish top, Liverpool would still get promoted because Durham don't have the money to go fully pro and to build a new ground, because Maiden Castle's a fantastic place to go and watch football, but it's not like it's not like City's ground. It's not like what Man United are going to be building. It's not like Boreham Wood. It's a university sports complex with a stand attached to it, which has the lowest seats I've ever sat on. I don't know if you've ever been there.
That's why we went
over
and stood up. It was easier.
They got torn off for standing behind the little swimming pool thing they've got for the athletics there.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. My dad goes, and this is one of the lovely things about women's football. Like you say, you go around at different grounds. My dad's a lifelong Sunderland fan, and he's followed Sunderland ladies for years and years. He's brought through, as a teacher, he's brought through some fantastic footballers. One of the footballers he brought through was Beth Heppel, who was in his class at school. My dad's a teacher, he ran the football team, and Beth was the best player of the girls and the boys. Was she? I think she was a couple of years below Jordan Henderson, who he also brought through. But because of Beth, my dad's always gone to watch Durham as well.
Yeah.
And obviously Beth's fantastic. She's one of the best players in the league. And but he goes Sunderland play away, he's at Durham. Sunderland play at home, he's at Sunderland. And then when Sunderland played Durham, he was very conflicted, which for a lifelong, my dad is like as lifelong Sunderland fan as you get. He's season ticket holder at the stadium. Grew up stone's throw from Roker Park kind of thing. That was pretty harsh for him, I think, that game, because he didn't know what to do. But there's loads of fans like that, and I've been to see Durham twice this season. They're fantastic. It's a great day out. And gets fantastic crowds. Gets probably a better crowd and better passionate support than Sunderland do, which is sad for a club the size of Sunderland to be basically being out-competed, not just on the pitch but off the pitch, by Durham. And there's a lot we could learn from them. A lot all clubs could learn from them in many ways, especially the way that they deal with young people, with the kids. And that's something I need to keep an eye on as well. So, I'm very ambitious for my club, but women's football is different, and it does have its unique selling points, and it does attract a different audience, and it is about kind of different things in some ways, but it's also about elite level sport ultimately, and that's what we want to see. We want to see elite level sport. We want to see the sport getting better and bigger and more exciting and faster paced. And in that sense, that's why I think it's good that you've got clubs like Man United with all the resources, with all the fans, with all the kind of glamour and glitz that comes with Man U as a brand. You've got it, and women should be able to participate in that as elite level sports people, equally with the men ultimately. And it's good, it's good what your club's doing, and I hope you do build a new ground. and that isn't taking money away from the women's championship. And some people see, Man United building a ground or Chelsea buying another striker as taking money away from our clubs. It's not. That's your club's money that you're putting in. You're investing in a player or in off-field infrastructure, and that's what the game needs. But it also needs that base level, and it needs regulation. It's not to stifle what Man United or Chelsea or Sunderland are doing. It's to make sure that Lewis and London City and Brighouse and FC Filed can compete. And what I really want is for there to be, as it's always been in the women's game, a Doncaster Bells at the elite level in the Champions League, and being able to go from where they are now back up to that level if they've got the ambition, if they've got the players, if they've got the development, if they've got the manager to do it, and it not to be an exclusive club, because the problem in the men's game is you've now got, and your club's part of it, an exclusive club of teams that can compete realistically, and that's that's what the Crouch report said we've got to try and do, which is not replicate the problems in the men's game, but to do that we've got to have the review of the women's game pretty soon.
I am conscious of time as well, because I know we've been going for quite a while. But no, you're all right, mate. I could listen to you talk all day, mate. Honestly, it's been absolutely brilliant. But I know we've had Paul's comment on air for quite a while, and this is the thing that irks me about this fit and proper tests. It hasn't worked in the Premier League in the past. The Glazers shouldn't have been allowed to leverage a buyout by Manchester United. That should have been stopped. But as it is, we are where we are. But He's suggesting we need fit and proper tests, similar level to the men's game, especially with Coventry there. It seems to be a case where the owners have taken the FA money and just gone. Do you think that there's room for a fit and proper test? And should the FA be looking at introducing that in the women's game, especially for teams that don't have the backing of the men's side? But also, would you like to see it for the people that have backing of the men's side? Because we've seen Liverpool. You mentioned Liverpool earlier. Now I want to get back into Liverpool. We seem to have lost Matt for a second. But I just wanted to get into Liverpool, because Liverpool, their men's team won the Premier League for the first time in 30 years, but the same season their women's team got relegated. We've heard horror stories about Liverpool, the way they've treated players, the way they've not really committed financially to the women's side. And then they sort of pull resources and bits and bobs like that. Do you think that there should be if it is a fit and proper test or something similar to that for ownerships of football clubs?
Again, it needs to be done underneath the independent regulator. Definitely. And I think you do, and I think it has to apply across the board. It has to apply to Coventry in the same way it applies to Man United, Liverpool, Sunderland. But obviously, in our case, Kirill Louis-Dreyfus has passed the FA or passed the EFL test. It's got to be the same test, essentially. In that sense. And personally, I think that test should be more than just are you disqualified as a director? Have you got some money? It should be, what are your intentions? Where does that money come from? Not casting aspersions in any particular direction. But some of the money in the Premier League is dirty money, or is blood money, but what are your plans? What money is in place? What are you investing this year? Where does it come from? How secure is that? And one thing, it's done in other sports, and one thing that should come under IREF, hopefully, for the whole game, is real-time financial monitoring. There is no reason why we shouldn't all know how much money our clubs, both on the men's side and the women's side, have got and how much they're spending. These are cultural institutions. They're not your normal private business. And in other leagues, you have real-time financial controls in that the leagues or the regulators know how much is being spent by each club each year, and what their sponsorship deals are and where they come from, what their income is, what their outgoings are. And there's business plans in place. And to be fair, like in the EFL, after Bury, it got a lot stricter. And I know that, like, when our previous owners, the Madrox Group, took over, they actually had to prove to the AFL that their business plan was sustainable for 3 years or something.
Yeah.
All right, there were a bunch of chances themselves, but what they did do was keep our club afloat to a certain extent. Sold some of our best players to use, young players, but you know, they didn't run the club very well. But what they did do is do what they said they would do to the EFL, and they didn't put the club at risk of going bust again. And that kind of commitment, but I also think real-time financial monitoring. It's something that sounds a lot more complicated than it actually is, because it's done elsewhere. It's just about going, look, they do it in that sport. That's how you do it. Not, oh, this is too complicated for the Premier League or English football, which is, you know, the richest professional sports league, one of the richest professional sport leagues in the world. It can be done. It's just a matter of will and about getting the legislation right, and then getting the regulation right, and how those laws and rules are implemented, and doing it properly, and not kind of the risk that we've got with the IREF, with the fan-led review, is that it'll be lobbied out of all kind of purpose. There'll be something that comes out of Parliament, but once kind of the Premier League's lobbyists have had their view on it and rewritten it for DCMS, all of the things that could make real change will get watered down and written out, and the Glazers and the Mansours and the Saudis will make sure that it isn't going to affect their ability to, you know, use football as a license to print money.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. Have you got anything else further to add, Matt, before we wrap up?
No, I just think, you know, spot on. Like, obviously, I talked a lot on Wednesday and obviously previously about sort of Coventry and the need for the FA to look into owners. And I think, you know, what Rich has said tonight has been spot on with everything. And, you know, I just hope now that people realise what we're dealing with here as fans, and that we do have a voice. And I know Natalie's big on this. She's always said, you know, do not be afraid of speaking up. You know, listen, not everybody will agree. That's absolutely fine. But the idea of fans coming together is a powerful voice. And listen, like I said, you know, somebody will have an idea, somebody else won't like it. It doesn't matter. Put it out there, you know, and I think that's going to be huge going forward. So, yeah, just thank you really to Rich for coming on, sort of highlighting the great work that's starting. And obviously, Rich, I'll let you shout out the socials where people can sort of get involved and, you know, come on board if you want to do that. And then we'll end it there, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, everyone can learn more about what's going on at Sunderland through Roker Report. We've got all of our women's stuff will be coming out first thing tomorrow morning ahead of the game against Crystal Palace tomorrow afternoon. FAWC Fan Collective is on Twitter at FAWC Fans, and that's where we're all getting together. If there are any London City fans out there, we'd love to get you involved. Also, Blackburn Rovers, we're lacking an involvement from Blackburn Rovers as well. We've got loads of people from the other clubs. You've got, you know, people from Charlton and everything have come on board eventually. So yeah, follow us, retweet us, use the hashtag Protect Women's Football, because that's what we're getting out there. The hashtag Protect Women's Football, because that's what it's about. Yeah, it's about advancing it and making it better, but ultimately, in the first instance, it's about protecting it. And yeah, keep tabs on this story, because there's stuff coming out on Coventry United all the time. There's a story in the Mail that's come out this evening that I haven't even touched on, and it's potentially, you know, really serious stuff. Yeah. So keep retweeting those journalists and people who are actually looking into it, because the more that the newspapers and the TV companies know that this has interest, the more coverage it'll get.
Yeah, absolutely,
mate. Rich, I'd love to have you back on again. If not this show, definitely one of our other shows. We've got obviously near enough every day of the week. Near enough, we've got a show going out. So love to get you back on, especially after you had your meeting with the FA and everything. Let us know how it's getting on, how it went on, and that, and whatever you're able to divulge in over the next few weeks and what have you. We'd love to get you back on, mate. Honestly, it made my job as a host absolutely easy tonight. It's been my first one in 6-7 weeks, despite me chipping up earlier on in the show, but I couldn't even say FAWC, I couldn't say that. But thank you, mate. You've been absolutely brilliant guest, mate. And even Matt's been quiet for once tonight. He's not.
No, I don't mind that. Yeah, absolutely fine. It's good to hear sort of different viewpoints and get things moving. It's important. So yeah, spot on.
Cheers. Well, it's been lovely. Thanks for having us on, and best luck for the rest of the season for Man United women.
Absolutely for Sunderland, pal. Right, we're going to wrap it up there, and we shall see you in the next one. See you later, everybody. Cheers.